You're listening to episode 108 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Jacqueline Carter joins us to speak about the mind of the leader, how to lead yourself, your people, and your organization for extraordinary results. As mindfulness grows and continues to become more mainstream, it is inevitable that it finds its way into work, the place most people spend a significant portion of their waking hours. So how might contemplative practice change things at work and at home? With a Master of Science in Organizational Behavior and over 20 years of experience supporting organizations through large-scale change, Jacqueline Carter has held a wide range of leadership and consulting roles across a range of industries, including transportation, oil and gas, insurance, and government. Jacqueline has many years of personal experience with mind training over the past 10 years and is focused on embedding mindfulness practices into daily corporate life. Special thanks to Matilda Havstein for coordinating today's interview. Our guest today is Jacqueline Carter. Jacqueline, welcome to the podcast. Very glad to have you here.
Thank you so much.
So let's start by having you tell us about your background with mindfulness and how that's complementing your work with organizational behavior.
Yeah, so I started my journey with mindfulness over 20 years ago, really starting in my own exploration of understanding my own crazy mind. And I think for many of us, that is part of our journey. I started very much from a book basis of reading lots of books. I did start with looking at Buddhism as being a fascinating way of looking at the world. I have a science background, so I really appreciated the connection into a scientific point of view and really looking at my own mind as my own little science research subject. And from there, I started to actually get into retreats and really started to see the benefits of the practice for my own personal life. At the same time, I have a master's degree in organizational behavior, and I was working with Deloitte Consulting in a very high intense, high pressure organization, working actually in Canada, in the US, and in Australia. And what I started to notice, and maybe if it's okay, I'll tell a little story when I really was able to bring these things together. What I noticed was that I was basically a closet meditator, because in Deloitte Consulting at that time, and this is now, as I said, many years ago, the idea of being still was not conducive to a corporate context. And the last thing that I was going to tell my partners or even my clients was that I like to, on vacations, I like to sit on very uncomfortable cushions and count my breaths for extended periods of time. That was never going to come up in conversation. But what I realized was that, and early on in my career, and I just realized when I saw the pressure that people were experiencing, my specialization being managing change, managing major organizational change, was that I just noticed how other people would take those hits, I would say, in terms of the natural, ebb and flow of corporate work life. And for me, when I didn't practice, which some days there was because of busyness, I noticed that I just wasn't as sharp. I wasn't as focused. I wasn't as kind to myself or kind to others. And for me, it just kind of came, I would say, my secret weapon, that I just felt like I just noticed I needed to practice to be able to show up and I guess be the consultant, be the colleague, be the friend that I wanted to be. So that's really how I got into it.
Just one of the things you said stuck out for me is the sitting still, not
Mm,
being part of corporate culture. And I know this is something I've run into in teaching mindfulness within that context. There is often from participants a sense of, I should be doing something.
exactly. Yes.
I'm wondering
Yes.
how you've wrestled with that as that has come up in your own training within the corporate world.
Well, it's interesting. What I would say is that, and I really, for a long time, like I said, the two things were very separate for me. I had my practice life, my sangha, my community, and then I went to work. And honestly, what I really noticed was that sometimes I would get into work and I would be in the doing mode, even though I had the practice and I knew that that wasn't conducive, but the two worlds to me just were so separate. So it was kind of like I literally would go on retreat to retreat into being that sense of stillness and that sense of calm. It actually took me experience in work life to be able to realize, and I'll give you again a very specific example, a client demanding something, me to give them information right now, and just feeling that pressure and wanting to be reactive and having the practice, the strength, and honestly, a little bit of the experience to be able to pause and say, if I react to this, it's not going to be good. And I realized then, no, wait a minute, I have this tool, to pause in this moment. And I can actually say to this client, you know what, I could respond to you right now, but I don't think it's going to be my best answer. I just need to take a moment to just, settle my mind, clear the clutter. And then I want to be able to come back to you with the answer to that question. And for me, that took so much courage. It was not easy because my brain still wanted to be in reactivity mode with the pressure that I was experiencing. I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it's counter to the culture in which we find
That's
ourselves
right.
up in high pressure work is there is an immediacy that takes priority over perhaps doing things well and taking a pause to make a meaningful and appropriate response.
Well, and I think that, and it's only, and this is, of course, like I said, many years ago when I was a senior consultant at Deloitte, and I think, quite honestly, it's only gotten worse. Everything now is kind of instant gratification. I remember days where if you had to find the answer to who won the Stanley Cup in 1974, you had to go research that. And of course, today you just Google it. And so I think that we have now rewired our brains to be able to expect everything to be now and urgent. And what we know, of course, from the science, and you've interviewed so many wonderful scientists, and you yourself as a practitioner know this, our reactive response is not often our best. The mind.
Absolutely. So you've been doing this incorporation of mindfulness into your work with organizational behavior for some time. I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit more about that for the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I'll tell you kind of how I started bringing the two together. So actually over 7 years ago, I was working for a large university and they were doing major change, system change, process change. Anybody who's worked in corporate life knows lots of change going on, big, big, big multi-million dollar project. And what happened was, and at that time, as I said, I was still in the closet as a practitioner. I just didn't feel the need to share with my colleagues that I practiced every day and how important it was to me. But the CFO, who was my client, who was also a good friend of mine, he stood up in front of a room full of 200 people. And I had a presentation that I had fully prepared him for, and he knew what to say and what to do. And as he took the stage, a few minutes later, he passed out. And in the middle of people trying to find out what was wrong, and the ambulance is coming, and all of this, I had one of those moments where, I mean, they couldn't find anything wrong with him, but we all knew what was wrong with him. He was overworked, he was overwhelmed, he wasn't taking care of his body, and he certainly wasn't taking care of his mind. And his mind was basically shut down from the pressure. And I felt so ashamed in that moment that I had these tools, which in a lot of ways they're so accessible, they're so simple, and they have helped me manage the stormy waters of corporate life and corporate change. And I realized that I was too chicken to share them with people because I was worried that they would think I was flaky. And honestly, and I could just say this to you as a practitioner, and I thought of all of the teachers who have, with their generosity of their time and the wisdom that they had imparted to me, honestly, sometimes just for a donation. And yet here I was, and I just had this complete sort of crisis of what am I doing with my life? And at that moment, what I decided was that if anybody would listen, and this was really what I said, was in a corporate environment, if anybody would listen, I would be willing to try to marry these two, to bring the simple tools and practices of mindfulness into day-to-day corporate life, to help people realize even just a little bit of that sense of calm and clarity and focus that had been so, so critical to me. And then what's interesting, so that was my crisis moment, and I'm maybe ashamed, but it's truthful to say that I was still too chicken to do it in North America, where I felt I had a reputation, and through actually an opportunity, through some other work, I had the chance to move to Singapore. And I thought, if I'm going to come out of the closet as a mindfulness practitioner, I thought Singapore was a great place to do it. East meets West. And that's when I really, decided I was going to reinvent myself as being somebody bringing corporate mindfulness into organizations. And at that time, I would just feel it was either karma or fate, I'm not sure which, but I met Rasmus Hugard, who is the founder of Potential Project. And he said, we're opening up in Asia. Do you want to join on? And I said, yes, absolutely. And that's really been the starting point for me.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting to hear how this resonates with so many stories that I've heard of people who are marrying their personal practice, something which is deeply transformative to them in their personal lives, with there's no reason that can't also be my working hours too.
Exactly. But I have to say it was not easy. I mean, we started, so Rasmus founded the organization over 11 years ago, and I joined, as I said, just around 6.5. And, at that time it was tough. There were many organizations still that did not embrace it. And I can't, I can't leave this interview without just the deep bow of gratitude I have to all of the scientists and the researchers that have kind of helped us bring this into mainstream. Because when you can flash up an fMRI scan to show this is your brain and this is what the practice does for you, that's just enabled us to bring it into corporate language, and in a way that I think that people can at least be willing to take the first step. And so I just think that we've come to such a wonderful period where the research really backs up the practice that's been, traditionally for thousands of years. And it's just such a wonderful time to be doing this work because there's so much more receptivity to it.
So when companies truly embrace mindfulness as part of their culture,
yes,
what happens for the business and for the people especially?
Yeah, well, what I will say, first of all, that I can't stand, hand on heart and say there's organizations that have perfectly integrated mindfulness into their culture. And one of the things that I love saying about my own mindfulness journey is it's a mindfulness practice. It's not mindfulness perfect. And of course, in corporations, it's the same, that, it's an intention to bring mindfulness in, to be able, an intention to be present with each other, an intention to not get caught up in busyness and make sure that, we're not just doing lots of things, we're doing the right things. And what I would say, and honestly, there's just so many leaders that I've had the privilege of working with that have been passionate about bringing that sense of more quality human interactions into their work environments. And what I've seen is the difference that it makes in terms of not only, as I said, the quality of interactions, but the creativity, the space that it provides for more creativity, the space that it provides for more powerful conversations. I can actually say to you, I don't agree with what you just did, or, what you said, that hurt me. But I can say it from a very, I'm owning my reaction to it. I'm not, losing my cool to be able to say that. And then we can have a real rich conversation. And I think coming back to my passion and my studies on organizational behavior, what I've seen is that the practice is a foundational tool that enables human beings to work more effectively together. It's just when that happens, not only is it amazing for the individuals, it's amazing for the organization. And I would say that it generates, and this is what we've seen, our programs have been researched by third-party researchers, people, their job satisfaction increases. And guess what? They're better with their customers and their clients. So lots of good things happen when there's a foundation of mindfulness in place.
So, how about for the people themselves? Does this impact their personal life, their family life as well?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. Our programs are very much designed to be workplace focused. And one of the things we look at is not just the practice itself. So it's not just offering mindfulness courses, it's actually finding ways to integrate daily practice into how you run your meetings. Are you all present with each other? How you do your emails, or how you make sure that you're getting good work-life balance. So really looking at your work and your home life and being able to use the practice to integrate those. So I think that for us, as I said, we really focus on the workplace. And what we find, though, is the stories we hear from people all the time are about what happens to them at home. I can share many stories, people saying, Jacqueline, my wife wants to meet you. She wants to thank you. She doesn't know what you did, but you did something. Because of course, as we know, the benefits of the practice, it's not just compartmentalized to this part of our lives. But what we find is because so much, I think, of the stress and the pressure that we're feeling at work carries into our home life, that if we can actually help people be a little bit more less stressed, a little bit more kind, and just have a richer work life, of course, they not only bring that mind from the practice, but they bring that mindset into their home life. So we really do see so many benefits at home.
Yeah, it's a deeply personal thing. And in some ways, I find it extraordinary to think that it wouldn't have an influence on one's personal life. And the stories like you have shared, and teaching in the corporate world for me too, the stories that people were most passionate about, that they cared about most, were the ones from their personal lives, which were far more common than the ones about, well, on work today, I didn't blow up with somebody. That's there too. But it's also, boy, I'm really connecting more with my kids, my spouse, with myself. Those are to me some really moving and meaningful stories.
Well, I think so. And I think especially because in work culture today, too many of us are getting almost a treadmill of behaviors that honestly are not our intentions of how we want to show up at work, but really how we want to show up at home. And I think the practice really helps us take a step back and, exactly, the stories of, people saying, I realize that when I'm reading my kids' bedtime stories, I'm not paying attention. And I don't want to do that. I actually really want to be there and read this story and be present with my kids because this time is precious. So totally agree.
So that touches on my next question, which is one I've wrestled with quite frequently online, even just today, is how might you reply to the criticisms about mindfulness just being used to pacify the workforce for nefarious intentions of the
Yeah.
but what is it? First off, what's your personal response to that? How do you receive that when you hear it?
What I would say is, the leaders that I've worked with, there isn't a single leader that I've worked with that it's like, okay, Jacqueline, how are we going to make sure that we manipulate all these people to practice so that they'll be pacified in terms of their stress? And like I said, I've just been so inspired. Some of the leaders that we've worked with, they're new to the practice as well. And they're really looking at it oftentimes as a gift that they're giving to their people, as a bit of their legacy, as a bit of a way to say, I see you're struggling. I just spoke with a leader yesterday, and he said to me, Jacqueline, is there any way you could help this one individual? Because when she shows up in meetings, I can feel her energy shaking. Is there any way maybe you could do a one-to-one and just, help her? Because I think the practice could really help her find a little bit more stillness in her life. So my answer to that question is find a leader that is introducing mindfulness for nefarious reasons. I would love to meet that person because I don't see that. And I think the other thing too is that I think in my experience from a corporate perspective is that, work is a trade, right? It's like I'm going to provide my skills and my time and you're going to give me certain things in return, right? So there's an exchange. And I think that for an organization to say, hey, we want you to be able to be your best. We want you to feel like, you can be fairly calm, you can be present. We want to create conditions that we think will be beneficial to you. I don't think that's such a wrong thing. If they forced it on people, which I have never seen, But to offer it and to say the research shows that this actually might create a more conducive work environment, I don't get that. I don't get that perspective. I do hear it, but it's just not. It's so distant from my experience.
And as well, thank you for sharing about that. So let's shift a little bit to the book project, The Mind of a Leader. How did that begin?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll start with. So we have our first book, which was called One Second Ahead: Enhancing Performance at Work with Mindfulness. And that book it's very practical, tool based. A lot of the things that we bring into organizations, how to be more mindful in meetings, how to be able to be more mindful in goal setting, creativity, and the like. And we've been doing, mindfulness in organizations for many, many years. And what we found was that when we really started to look at our work with leaders, that mindfulness alone just didn't seem to be enough. And what we wanted to do, and especially as we started to see, the stats, what we're looking at in the leadership space in our work with leaders is a real crisis in terms of leadership. And some of the research that we found, many people are talking about the engagement scores, and we know that 13% of the workforce is engaged, 24% actively disengaged. And then studies like there was a McKinsey study where they asked leaders whether they thought they were doing a good job. 77% of leaders, I'm a pretty good leader. The research on the back end shows 82% of people do not think their leaders are doing a good job. So a huge disconnect between how leaders perceive themselves and a tremendous amount of suffering. There was another research study that really hit us, and you may have seen it, but it was a study that showed that 35% of employees would forego a paycheck to see their leader fired. That's bad, right? I would pay money essentially, or forego money just to be able to get rid of this person who's causing such stress for me. And of course, all of these stats is despite the fact that, and we're part of this, $46 billion annually is spent on leadership development. And so we had to take a look at ourselves as well as those others, many, many others of our co-creators in this space providing leadership training, saying, are we hitting the mark? Because it doesn't seem like it, and productivity levels have stagnated across the world as well. So that started us with, we wanted to put our research hat on and a journey over 2 years to really try to answer the question, what are the challenges for leaders today, and what do they need to be able to help them not only survive, but thrive in today's, honestly, quite challenging work environment. So that was the beginning of the journey. And through that, we partnered with Harvard Business Review Press, who are just an amazing partner to work with. And through HBR, we were able to access their extended network. So we were able to conduct surveys. Over 35,000 people responded to an assessment that we did. We were able to tap into assessments of over 1,000 leaders from around the globe, 71 countries, people at all different levels of leadership. And we also interviewed over 200 C-suite executives from major, large global corporations. And what we found, and it was really interesting, is yes, we did have a premise that mindfulness would be good. So we did have that as a hypothesis. And I would say we looked for it, we asked questions about it, and we validated the importance of mindfulness. But what was really interesting is that in addition to that, we kept on coming into seeing two other qualities that kept on coming up. The second one being selflessness, and how important it was the leaders that we spoke to that really had that sense of the importance of an other perspective, not about me, and how they talked about their egos. If they allowed their egos to get in the way, that's when not good things happened. And we had a lot of great stories about that. So the second quality being selflessness, and the third one being compassion, starting with compassion for self and compassion of others. And so that's really the story of the book, and then the foundation of what we found and what we explored.
As you're describing that, I find it not at all surprising, and hope that some of the folks who are concerned about these issues that we've talked about have a chance to hear this and understand that it may not quite be the thing you think it is. That there are these effects because leaders are human beings as well, and maybe in need of some help in some way that can be provided by this.
Well, and just to give some interesting stats again on this from our research, and this was, it was not surprising, but it was it was a bit heart-wrenching. Two things. One, we found that 73% of leaders through the interviews, through the surveys that we did, feel unmindful most of the time. Most of the time, 73% of the time. And it's just, that's no wonder there's this crisis in terms of people not feeling valued when their leaders aren't present with them. And I think the positive thing is that they knew that. The other stat that we had was that 91% of leaders felt compassion was key. They got it. They know if I care about people, they'll want to work with me. I mean, it's basic human nature. But what was interesting is 80% said that they would love to be able to increase their compassion, but they had no idea how. So they were just feeling like, yeah, I know it's important, but one, they said, I don't have time. And secondly, they said, I just don't know how to do it.
How to begin.
How to begin. Exactly. Yeah.
So let's dive into the book a little bit more deeply. Who is it for? What are some of the things that are included in it?
Yeah, that's a great question. We really wrote it with those leaders in mind that we wanted to really, who are open. Of course, not everybody's going to be open. This is our view around leadership and what leaders need. Not everybody's going to be open to that. But it's really for those leaders who recognize the challenges that they're facing with today's workforce and today's complexity in terms of business. And they're willing to dive into the journey of there is trainings in the book. So it is it's a practice book as well as it's rich with science. We interviewed a lot of researchers. There's filled with science. It's filled with very practical tips and tools. One thing you can walk away with today and try that would help you maybe bring a little bit more mindfulness or selflessness or compassion into your leadership. But in addition to that, I suppose we're really hopeful that it's for aspiring leaders, people that want to see themselves getting into the next level. Our hope is, and certainly what we found from the book, was that the leaders that manage to be able to embrace and embody these qualities are the ones that people look up to. And so that's really the audience that we have for the book.
So let's shift again a little bit. You've mentioned some of the potential project. I'm wondering if you could say a bit more about that. What are some of the things that maybe you're working on now?
So the potential project, a global organization, maybe just to give some perspectives on it, we're in 26 countries now. We have over 200 facilitators worldwide, and we're very privileged to be working with some of the largest global companies, Accenture, Cisco, Lego, IKEA, and many more. And our work is actually changed. Initially, when we started out a number of years ago, it was much more bring in this program. Here's a mindfulness program. As I said, very workplace focused and very practical. And what we're really seeing now, and we're so excited about this, is we're seeing now that organizations more and more are saying, how do we create a mindful culture? And they don't want this to just be a program. And it was just so interesting. We were just actually at Marriott last week, and that's what they said to the Jacqueline. We don't want this to just be, just some program that people can take and then they go back into the regular busyness. We want to see this as something bigger that we're integrating into our culture. And it's one of the things that we're very passionate about also when we partner with our clients, and we're seeing this more and more. But we don't want to bring in mindfulness for just mindfulness sake, although that would be great. But our experience is that when you're working with businesses, they do have shareholders. They have a bottom line, sometimes too much focus on shareholders, but that's another story. But what we find is that if you tie it to business outcomes, so how would being more mindful be beneficial to you as an organization? Then it's actually a much more powerful conversation. So, and we're really trying to encourage organizations not to just see this as a fad. I have heard mindfulness is good. We'll offer it to people and it'll be kind of some wellness thing that if budgets crunches come, we'll probably not continue to fund. So for our work, what we're seeing and the wonderful, amazing clients that we work with, when they say, no, wait a minute, this is a foundational tool that we want leaders to have. And we're embedding it into our leadership development program. This is actually foundation. We're going through major change, and we know that the mind is actually the starting point of understanding how we resist change and also how we can be more resilient to the changes that we're facing. We want mindfulness to be embedded into our change program. And so that's the big shift. And that's, I would say, what we're super excited about. And then the other thing that we're super excited about is, as I said, we've been doing mindfulness for a long time. The fact that we're hearing leaders ask for things like selflessness and compassion really was what blew us away. And we're so excited to start bringing those types of practices into a corporate context.
So fascinating. Here you use the term in very intentionally, I put in the question earlier about culture.
Yes.
That it's not point in time is a great door opener. Having a program that lasts a number of weeks and then you're done is perhaps less effective than having this embedded long term in simply how we are in the workplace and at home. Again, there's that carryover. You can't really separate as a person that you are. It's going to be influences, sometimes quite profound.
Yes.
One part of your life as another. So thank you very much for doing that work. And I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to share with the listeners.
I guess perhaps, well, first of all, I just thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a real privilege to be here. And thank you for all the work that you do in terms of bringing these stories and experiences to the broader public. I guess probably what I would say is that I think that my guess is that a lot of your listeners are already practitioners. They're already, part of the choir. And one of the things that we're really passionate about is how to use skillful means to bring in people that would never, show up for a mindfulness training course. And for anybody that's interested in sort of being a part of that movement where we can bring it more into everyday language, everyday corporate work life, so that we can embed these practices into a much larger portion of society. Please reach out because that's something that we're ridiculously passionate about, and certainly would love to be part of as a broader social movement around this.
Thank you. Well, for folks who are listening right now, you can check out more. I'm going to give you a couple of different sites. There's the mindoftheleaderbook.com as well as potentialproject.com. Both of those will be linked on the episode page for this episode. Our guest today, Jacqueline Carter. Jacqueline, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been great fun.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.